What did you do in your childhood or youth that you regret now?
I lived for a very long time with the belief that I needed to be convenient for everyone. Not argue, not say no, adapt. I thought that this way I would have more friends, fewer conflicts, and an easier life overall. And for a while, it even worked. People loved me. I was the one who would always help, support, agree. But over time, a strange feeling started to appear, as if I was valued, cool, but not respected. I began to notice that I could be asked for something at an inconvenient moment. My opinion could be ignored. My plans were easily pushed aside if someone needed something. And the worst part, I allowed it myself. One day a situation happened that really woke me up. I planned an important event for myself, invested time, prepared, and at the last moment, an acquaintance asked me to help him with something urgent, and I agreed. As always, I cancelled my plans, and then it turned out that it was not even that urgent. He just knew I would not refuse, and that is when it hit me. I sat and thought, why do I put other people's needs above my own constantly? And the answer was simple and unpleasant. Because I was afraid that if I started saying no, people would stop loving me. But reality turned out to be different. When I gradually started saying no, nothing catastrophic happened. On the contrary, some people began to take me more seriously, and those who disappeared most likely were not real anyway. The dumbest mistake was not that I helped people, but that I completely ignored myself. And it took years to understand that.
When I was 18, I had quite complicated relations with my father. We did not argue constantly, but it was hard to call us close. Most conversations ended either in silence or slight tension. I always felt that he did not understand me. He thought that I did not listen, and instead of changing it somehow, we both just left everything as it was. I often thought that someday we would talk normally. Not now, later. When I got older, when he became calmer, when the right moment appeared. I even imagined these conversations in my head. What I would say, how I would explain, how we would finally understand each other. But in reality, I just lived my life. Studies, friends, my own problems, everything seemed more important. And one day that later simply disappeared. He was gone. And I remember very well the strange feeling that appeared then. It was not sharp pain. It was something else. As if all those conversations I postponed for later suddenly became impossible. Forever. I kept replaying small details in my head. Moments when I could have just sat next to him. When I could have asked something simple. When I could have at least tried. But I did not do it. Not because I did not want to, but because I was sure I still had time.
When I was 17, I was completely sure that I understood how life works. I thought I was already grown enough to make my own decisions, and that most advice from older people was just overcaution. I had the opportunity to enter a decent specialty then, not perfect, but promising. My parents did not force me, but strongly advised me to think seriously, but I decided otherwise. I thought, why do I need this now? I still have time. I will take a break, rest, figure out what I want. It sounded logical in my head. The first few months were even pleasant. I felt freedom, no stress, no deadlines. I convinced myself that this is the life I wanted. But gradually something else started to happen. My classmates began to move forward. Some entered universities. Some moved to other cities. Some started working. They had new acquaintances, new experiences. And I stayed in place. At first I did not notice it. Then I started to feel it a little. And after a year it was very obvious. I remember the moment when I met an old friend. He talked about studying, his plans, what he wanted to do next. And then he asked me, "And what are you doing now?" And I did not know what to answer, not because I was doing nothing, but because it all had no direction. It was a very unpleasant moment, because I suddenly realized that pause is not a neutral state. It is also a choice, and that choice has consequences. I did not ruin my life or anything like that, but I lost time that I could have used much better. And the worst part, this realization did not come immediately, but gradually. Now I understand that the problem was not in taking a break. The problem was that I did it without a plan, thinking that things will somehow work out. No, they do not work out on their own. Sometimes the dumbest mistake is not something sharp or dangerous, but the quiet decision to do nothing, which then stretches for years.
When I was 17, I had a group of friends with whom I spent almost all my time. We walked together, sat online together, planned the future together, as it usually happens. I was sure they were my people, the ones who would stay for a long time. Then something started to change. At first, small things. They called me less often, did not reply immediately. Sometimes I found out they went out without me, but I ignored it. I told myself I was just overthinking, that people were busy, that it was normal. And then one day I saw a story. They were all together, in the same place where we often gathered, and no one even wrote to me. I remember sitting and staring at the screen, and in my head there was only one thought. What did I do wrong? But I did not write anything, because I did not want to look like the one who imposes. A few weeks passed, and this distance became normal. We almost did not talk anymore, and only much later I accidentally found out the truth. From one person I randomly met. It turned out they did not just drift away. They deliberately stopped inviting me. Not because of one big reason, but because of many small things I did not even notice. I often interrupted, joked out of place, sometimes acted as if I was the main one, and for me it was a shock. Because in my head I was a normal friend, but in theirs, I was someone who became difficult. And the worst part was not that they left, but that no one said anything. And for years I thought I was abandoned without reason. Though there was a reason, I just did not see it.
At 17, I started my first serious relationship. At the beginning, everything was very emotional, strong, bright. I thought that this was the one. But over time things started to appear that made me tense. Control, jealousy, constant complaints. At first it was small, then more often. But each time I found an explanation. She's just worried. It is because of me. I can fix it. I was very afraid of losing this relationship. So I started adapting. Talking less, arguing less, being less myself. I thought that if I tried hard enough, everything would become normal. It did not. Over time, I no longer recognized myself. I became quieter, tense, constantly thinking that I might say something wrong. But even then I did not leave. Because in my head there was one thought: we have already been through so much together, I cannot just give up. And only after a few years it all ended. Not because I finally dared, but because it simply collapsed on its own. And you know what was the worst part? Not the pain after the breakup, but the realization of how much time I voluntarily spent in something that was breaking me.
At 18, I got my first proper job. For me, it was something big. I was very afraid of losing it, so I tried to look as perfect as possible. Never make mistakes, control everything, manage everything on time. And one day, I really messed up. Nothing critical. Just a small mistake that could be quickly fixed. But I got scared, and instead of telling the truth, I lied. I said it was not me, that someone else did it. And it worked. No one said anything. The problem was solved, and on the surface, everything was fine. But a few days later, I was called for a talk, calmly, without aggression. And there they showed me the log, where it was clearly visible that it was me. And then something strange happened. I was not scolded for the mistake. At all, the boss said. Mistakes are normal. But lying is the problem. And at that moment, I realized it was no longer about that small thing. I had lost trust. I was not fired immediately. But after that, they started treating me differently. Checking, controlling, not giving proper tasks. And after some time, I left myself. And the worst part was the realization. If I had just told the truth, nothing would have happened. I really lost an opportunity because of 1 second of fear.
At 16, I tried cocaine for the first time. Company, parties, and everyone saying try it, nothing scary. I was not the one who immediately fell into it. On the contrary, I refused for a long time. And that is why when I tried, I was sure I was not the kind of person who would get hooked. The first time, nothing special. The second, already more interesting. Then it became part of relaxation. I clearly drew a line in my head. I'm not like them, I control it. I could go weeks without doing it. And that only confirmed my confidence. And then something changed. Very imperceptibly. It stopped being for fun. It became a way to switch off. Bad day, powder. Stress, powder. Bored, powder. I did not notice the moment when it became regular, but I remember very well the moment when I realized something was wrong. I woke up thinking not what to do today, but where to find it. And that was strange, unpleasant. I tried just not to do it. And for the first time it became difficult. Really difficult. Nerves, irritation, emptiness. And then it hit me. I do not control it. It controls me. I tried many times to quit, but it did not work. Now I'm 26 and I have not used anything for 3 years, only alcohol on holidays, and I am truly happy that I overcame it.
When I was 18, I felt like I more or less controlled my life. Not perfectly, but fine. Studies, friends, relationships. Everything looked like most people's lives. When the delay started, I did not worry much. I blamed it on stress. Exams, lack of sleep, nerves, the standard set. Another week passed, then another, and only then I started to get nervous. I remember buying the test, a strange feeling, as if it was not happening to me, as if it was some movie scene. I took the test and just stared at it. 2 lines. I did not cry. I did not get scared immediately. I just froze, as if my brain did not want to process the information. My first thought was, this is a mistake. The second, okay, I will figure it out now. And then came the realization that this was not a situation that could be solved tomorrow. I told my boyfriend. He was silent for a long time. And then he said something like, well, we need to think. And at that moment, I felt for the first time that I was in this alone. Not completely, but not the way I imagined. The next days were like fog. Conversations, options, fear. I looked at other people and thought, they have no idea what is in my head right now. I tried to act normal. But inside, everything was turning upside down. And the scariest part was not what to do, but the realization that any decision would change life.
I had a friend with whom we grew up together. He was always a bit more extreme. More risk, more emotions, more whatever. I was more careful, and I liked that. I looked at him and thought, this will not happen to me. When he started using, I was nearby, but not inside. I helped, listened, sometimes pulled him out of problems. And somewhere deep in my head, there was a feeling I control the situation. Then he got a girlfriend. After some time, she got pregnant. There was a lot of chaos, arguments, decisions, pressure. I saw it all from the side, and again thought, good thing it is not me. They decided not to keep the child. After that, he changed. Not sharply, but somehow quieter, more distant. I thought it was temporary that he would recover, but then he started using more, stronger. And one day I got a call, and they said he passed away. I could not process it properly for a long time, because in my head it was his story, his mistakes, his choice, and then, after some time, a very unpleasant thought came to me. All this time I stood nearby and thought I was not like him, that I was just an observer. But I was part of it. I saw how everything was going wrong, and did nothing. Because I thought it did not concern me, with this I lost a friend with whom I lived my whole life. And that is probably the worst mistake. When you think it is someone else's story, until it ends right in front of you.
When I was 17, I argued with a friend I had known almost all my life. It was not one big reason, more like many small things that piled up, misunderstandings, offenses, unsaid words. And one day it just exploded. We said a lot of unnecessary things to each other, things we might have thought, but definitely should not have said in that form. I remember walking home after that conversation and replaying everything in my head, and instead of thinking how to fix it, I thought something else. He is guilty too. That feeling was very convenient. It allowed me to do nothing. The next days were strange. We did not text, did not call, but I kept thinking about it, and several times I even picked up my phone to write something like, "Listen, let's talk normally." But each time I stopped, because another thought appeared in my head. Why should I be the first? He can write too. And it seemed fair. A week passed, then two, and each day it became harder to write, because it was no longer just sorry. It was, why did we stay silent so long? And that pause started working against us. I saw him sometimes from afar, at school, on the street, and we pretended not to notice each other. The worst part was that each day it became easier, as if you get used to the absence of someone who was recently part of your life. And I really started to think, well, maybe that is how it should be. People drift apart. It is normal. And then a mutual acquaintance wrote to me, said he was moving to another city forever. And at that moment, I felt a very strange sensation, not panic, not shock, but clear understanding. If I did nothing now, it was definitely the end. I picked up my phone, and for the first time in all that time I wrote a long message without drama, just as it was. But there was no reply. I thought he was ignoring me. After a few hours I wrote again, then again. And only later I found out he had already left and changed his number. And that was the moment when everything finally closed, not because of the argument, not because of the words, but because of the silence that lasted too long. And now when I think about it, I realize the problem was not in that fight, and not in who was right. The problem was that I put my ego above the person, and I lost. Because some things can be fixed immediately, but almost impossible to fix after time. I do not know if this is the mistake I regret the most, because there were many, but the first memory that comes to mind is this one.
I wanted quick money and paid much more. When I was 18, I really wanted to start earning, not just for coffee, but properly, so I would not depend on my parents, so I would have my own money. And honestly, I did not want to wait. I did not want to study for years, to build something gradually. It seemed to me there had to be a faster way, and such a way appeared, through an acquaintance. Nothing criminal at first glance. Just help in one scheme, resale, bypassing certain rules, a bit grey but presented as everyone does it. And the main thing, quick money. The first time I doubted, but when I saw the result, the doubts disappeared. It really worked. I got an amount I would not have earned in several months of ordinary work. And at that moment, something switched. I stopped thinking, is this right? I started thinking how to make more. And it grew. More deals, more money, more confidence that I found the system. I even began to look down on others, like they were wasting time while I was moving faster. And it lasted about half a year, and then everything stopped. Suddenly, one of the people through whom it all worked just disappeared, with money. Not only mine, and not only small amounts, but enough to hurt. At first, I thought it was temporary, that he would return, that it was some misunderstanding, but very quickly it became clear, no. And then another part of the story began, people I worked with started asking, some calmly, some not, because for them I was part of this process, and suddenly I was not the one who earns but the one they demand from. I tried to explain that I got trapped too, that I also lost, but few cared, and at some point I realized the problem was no longer about money. Money was not even the main thing. I lost trust, reputation, and several good relationships. And the most ironic part, I convinced myself it was a smart path, that I simply understood faster how the world works. But in reality, I just chose a shortcut without thinking where it led. And it led me to a point where I had to pay much more than I earned. I took many loans to return money to those who invested, and I repaid the loans by working as a courier. I lost a lot of time. Now I'm 22, and I closed the last loan 3 months ago. At the moment I live with my parents and work as a courier, just like 3 years ago when all my money burned.